Shalom. There is a beautiful psalm. It's actually one of my favorite psalms. It is found in Psalms 92, verse 6. It goes in the Hebrew, Ma gadlu ma'asecha ya, meod amku machshavotecha, which means, how grand are your deeds, Eternal One. How deep and how intricate are your thoughts. I love this passage, which was written by, perhaps it was King David or King Solomon, or maybe one of the Levites who sang in the ancient temple. I love it because I imagine that whoever wrote that psalm was looking at some manifestation of nature. Maybe it was a blade of grass or a petal on a flower, or maybe that person looked up at the sky in a starry night and saw how intricate the universe is, and worship. The person was in awe not only of the physical manifestation of what he saw, but of the mind that brought into being whatever he was looking at in nature. In this week's Torah portion, Ki Tisa, we see that God wants us to relate and to feel reverence for not any physical or material manifestation of that's found in nature, but God's mind, God's design, God's intellect that brings forth all that we see in this magnificent universe of ours. After the Exodus from Egypt, after the giving of the Ten Commandments, and after that disgraceful episode earlier in the Torah portion of the Israelites worshiping the golden calf, Moses addresses God, and he wants to see God. He says to God in chapter 33 of the book of Exodus, he says, "Now, if I have truly gained your favor, pray, let me know your ways, that I may know you and continue in your favor." And we skip down to verse 17. And the Eternal One, God, says to Moses, "I will also do this thing that you have asked for you have truly gained my favor, and I have singled you out by name." He said, this is Moses addressing God, "Oh, let me behold your presence." Kevodecha, your presence. It sort of has a feel of physicality about it. And God answered, "I will make all my goodness, tovi, all of my goodness, pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name eternal, that is Adonai, and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show." So what God does, God takes Moses and places him in a cleft by the rocks, a kind of a splitting of the rocks there, and God covers Moses' eyes, and God passes before Moses, and as God is passing before Moses, God removes the divine hand from Moses' eyes, and Moses sees God's goodness. And I would translate the word, or interpret the word tovi, as not the physical manifestation of God, but the mind, the intellect, the design that brings forth all of which we see. Now, I was reading a poem this morning by the American poet laureate Robert Frost, and I think Robert Frost in this particular poem experiences what he, or at least I perceive, was the mind of God. Now, the poem is called "A Considerable Speck." A speck that would have been beneath my sight on any but a paper sheet so white, set off across what I had written there, and I had idly poised my pen in air, to stop it with a period of ink, when something strange about it made me think. This was no dust speck by my breathing blown, but unmistakably a living mite, with inclinations it could call its own. It paused as with suspicion of my pen, and then came racing wildly on again, to where my manuscript was not yet dry. Then paused again, and either drank or smelt with loathing, for again it turned to fly. Plainly, with an intelligence I dealt. It seemed too tiny to have room for feet, yet must have had a set of them complete. To express how much it didn't want to die, it ran with terror, and with cunning crept. It faltered, I could see it hesitate. Then in the middle of the open sheet, cower down in desperation to accept whatever I accorded it of fate. I had none of the tender-than-thou collectivist regimenting love with which the modern world is being swept, but this poor microscopic item now. Since it was nothing I knew evil of, I let it lie there till I hope it slept. I have a mind myself and recognize mind when I meet it with it in any guise. No one can know how glad I am to find on any sheet the least display of mind. There we find Robert Frost seeing this tiny little insect running across a page on which he's writing. And even in that tiny little insect, the mite as he refers to it, he sees mind, he sees intelligence, he sees complexity. And he, in a sense, meets the mind of God. That is our challenge. Our challenge is to not get so caught up in the material world, but instead to look for the design, the intelligence, the purpose, and the meaning behind all of which we behold in this grand universe in which we dwell. Well, I hope that you will read this week's Torah portion and come to your own conclusion. Shabbat Shalom.